Today, I'm going to explain a drama and sci-fi show called Striking Viper. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. Danny arrives at the year club and heads inside. At the club, Theo locks eyes with an interested stranger and the two share a smile. Beside her, Danny strikes up a conversation asking if she's alone. The two flirt and Danny buys her a drink while guessing what she would like. Just then, Carl arrives with Daisy and introduces her to Danny and Theo. Carl reveals that Danny and Theo are his roommates whom he accuses of dating so that they can get the biggest room in the apartment. On the dance floor, Theo confesses that the stranger roleplay Danny did earlier got her in the mood. Danny takes note of the information and the two begin to dance. Back at the apartment, Danny and Theo kiss and get intimate on the counter. Later that night, Danny wakes up and finds Carl on the couch playing the fighting game Striking Vipers. Carl invites him to play, but Danny is hesitant because he has work the next day. Carl insists and Danny quickly gives in. Meanwhile, Theo wakes up to an empty bed and hears noises from the living room. Carl's character, Roxette, wins the match. Danny wants to head to bed, but Carl presses play, getting him to play another round. Carl picks Roxette again, and Danny picks his favorite character, Lance. They choose the temple as their setting, where Roxette easily wins another round. 11 years later, Danny and Theo are married with a 5-year-old son named Tyler. The couple hosts a barbecue in their backyard for Danny's birthday. In the kitchen, Theo cleans up Tyler's mess, looking tired from the festivities. The doorbell rings, so she checks and finds Carl outside. The two hug, not having seen each other in a long while. Theo asks about Daisy, but Carl reveals they had broken up a year ago. She apologizes for not knowing, but Carl tells her it's no big deal. Theo checks herself in the mirror and notices a stain on her dress. In the backyard, Danny spaces out, staring at one of the guests behind. Carl arrives and greets him. He gives Danny his birthday gift, the newest installment of Striking Vipers, but Danny notices it needs the VR add-on which he doesn't have. Carl says he does, so Danny checks the gift bag to find that Carl also bought him the VR disc. Danny is hesitant to accept such an expensive gift, but Carl insists, saying it will blow his mind. They grab a beer inside to catch up. Carl teases Danny that he let himself go now that he's married. Danny defends that he hasn't been able to work out ever since his knee injury. Carl shows Danny pictures of his date that night, Mariella, who is a decade younger than them. That night, Theo takes over cleanup duty, telling Danny to rest since it's his birthday. She asks him about Carl and Daisy's breakup, but Danny says he also didn't know since he hasn't spoken to Carl in almost a year. Theo says they should invite him over for dinner so the two can catch up properly. At dinner with Mariella, Carl points out a server with a Dennis Rodman haircut. Mariella looks confused, so she searches up who Dennis Rodman is and only laughs after, leaving Carl underwhelmed. In their bedroom, Theo points out that her fertility app shows they should try within an hour for a maximum chances of conceiving a second baby. However, both of them are too tired from the party to do anything, so Theo decides to sleep early. At Carl's apartment, he and Mariella lie in bed after their activity, looking satisfied. Mariella takes out her phone and starts scrolling, which puts off Carl. Danny is playing Tetris when he gets a notification from Carl inviting him to play Striking Vipers X. Danny tells Carl it's too late in the night, but Carl convinces him to play. After syncing up their VR, Carl chooses Roxette while Danny chooses Lance. They select the temple and their bodies go limp as they get transported into the game. Danny feels disoriented at first. His character Lance looks around and marvels at how realistic everything looks. Carl loads as Roxette shortly after. Although a woman, Roxette still talks and acts like Carl. Danny looks down at Lance's impressive chiseled chest, but Carl one-ups him and shows Roxette's bust. Danny's in awe, even more so when he notices his knee feeling good as new. The two begin round 1, but Danny hesitates, asking if it's gonna hurt. To answer, Carl starts punching and kicking him as the game emulates all physical sensations. Danny has no time to react as Carl executes 2 consecutive skills, knocking him down. Danny's character gets an injury and bleeds, but Carl assures him the body's reset after each round. Sure enough, the bleeding stops and Danny's back on his feet again. This time, Danny tries to fight back. Although rusty, he begins to block and attack Carl, and the two get into an intense match. They stumble to the edge of the arena and find themselves in a compromising position. They stare at each other for an intense second until Carl leans down and their characters kiss passionately. After a few seconds, Danny snaps out of it, pushing a bewildered-looking Carl off him. Danny wipes his lips and asks how to log off. Carl shouts "exit game" and disappears. Danny does the same. On his couch, Danny comes out of the game, still freaked out, while Carl splashes his face with cold water. Danny returns to bed and Theo curls up on him. She sleepily reaches down and is surprised to feel that Danny is aroused. They end up doing it, but Danny looks guilty after. The next day, Danny becomes distracted thinking about what happened with Carl. Meanwhile, at his apartment, Carl feels frustrated and takes it out on his pinball machine. That night, Theo heads out to a friend's party, leaving Danny and Tyler alone. After putting Tyler to bed, Danny plays Tetris. He gets a notification from Carl inviting him to play the game. Danny accepts and blurts out that he was drunk from the party the last time they played. Carl readily says he was drunk as well to mitigate the awkward tension. They log in and press start, loading by the sea. The air is still awkward, although they try to play it off. However, the minute the first round starts, they grab each other and kiss intensely. At the party, Theo calls her cab, leaving early. She sees a young couple making out in the alley and stares a second too long. Back in the game, Danny and Carl just finished doing it. Carl jokes that this must mean that they're gay, but Danny clarifies that it doesn't feel that way to him. Just then, Danny feels a kick to his leg. He exits the game immediately and finds Tyler out of bed. Later, Danny sends Carl an apology for abruptly leaving. He hurriedly shuts his phone off and pretends to sleep when he hears Theo arrive. The next day, Theo shares she left the party early because she got her period, disappointed they haven't gotten pregnant again. Danny apologizes, but Theo assures him that they can try again. She asks for a kiss, but Danny kisses her nose instead. Danny and Carl go through their days distracted and deep in thought and always meeting in the game every night, having intense physical activities at the various game locations. Theo tries to be intimate with Danny again, but Danny always says he's too tired. Theo begins to wonder if she's a problem, looking at her face and body in the mirror. One night in the game, Danny wonders how it feels to play as a woman. Carl tells him the experience is more satisfying and the two start kissing again. One sunny day, the family is out in their backyard with Theo pushing Tyler on the swing. When she looks back at Danny, she notices he's looking into the horizon deep in thought. While at work one day, Danny receives a text from Theo saying she got a babysitter for the night. Theo looks confused and asks what for. Theo texts him it's their wedding anniversary, obviously hurt. Danny texts Carl he can't make it tonight, hesitating if he should add an X at the end of his message. Carl receives a message without an X, looking disappointed at Danny's cancellation. That night, Theo waits for Danny at a bar. She locks eyes with someone from across the room. The man comes over, obviously interested, but Theo shows her wedding ring, leaving the man disappointed. He apologizes, but Theo tells him there's no need to be sorry. The two share a short laugh and the man leaves. Danny arrives as they head to dinner. After their meal, the two sit awkwardly at their table. Theo opens up her concerns about Danny's behavior the past few days. She asks him if anything is going on with him, but Danny insists that there isn't. She then asks if he doesn't want her anymore, citing how they haven't been intimate in weeks. Danny only holds her hand, assuring her that nothing is wrong. At Carl's apartment, he and Mariella are getting intimate, but he can't finish. Mariella ends up pleasuring herself instead. Later, Danny plays Tetris when the now familiar notification pops up. However, guilt catches up to him, so Danny puts the VR disc back in its box and hides it at the back of a cabinet. The next day, Carl sends Danny a message asking where he is. After some thought, Danny calls him and insists they can't do it anymore. Carl argues it's not cheating because it's not real since it's just a game. Carl tries to bargain for once a month, but Danny tells him he wants a clean break and hangs up. 7 months pass by, and Carl sits around in his messy apartment playing pinball to let out his frustrations. Meanwhile, Theo watches Danny and Tyler playing in the backyard, rubbing her pregnant belly. Some days later, Theo greets Danny a happy birthday with a chocolate bar, apologizing for the small gift. Danny kisses her, then notices she's cooking too much just for the two of them. Theo reveals that she invited Carl as a surprise for his birthday, knowing they hadn't seen each other in a long while. Danny's face hardens, leaving Theo confused. During dinner, Theo tries her best to get the conversation flowing by reminiscing about their time living together, but Danny and Carl barely speak. When Theo leaves to get dessert, Danny immediately confronts Carl about accepting Theo's invitation. Carl reveals that he's tried everything in the VR, including getting intimate with other players, but nothing compares to doing it with Danny. He asks Danny to meet him in the game at midnight just before Theo returns, confused at the tense atmosphere. That night, Danny hesitates when the clock strikes 12. He eventually gives in and heads downstairs. The next moment, Danny and Carl are going at it again in the game as Roxette and Lance. The two release months of pent-up tension and frustration. After the deed, Carl suddenly blurts out "I love you," surprising Danny. Carl tries to excuse that he doesn't know where the words came out from, but wonders if Danny feels the same. Danny punches the game over sign in anger and tells Carl to meet him at the parking lot of the Year Club before exiting the game. They meet at the parking lot and Danny immediately takes off his glasses, making Carl think he wants to fight. Instead, Danny wants to try kissing him since it's the only way to know how they truly feel for each other. The two step closer, not knowing how to start. Carl finally leans in and they kiss in real life for the first time. However, after just a few seconds, Carl pulls back, disappointed as he felt nothing from the kiss. Danny pauses before saying he too didn't feel anything. The two reconcile, but Carl doesn't let go, insisting it's different in the game, making Danny angry. They end up fighting in the middle of the road until a police car arrives. Theo drives to the police station and picks up Danny. On the way home, Theo says she knew he and Carl had an argument at dinner and asks what the fight was about, but Danny remains silent. This frustrates Theo, urging him to talk to her for once. Danny looks at her and decides to explain. Months later, Danny and Theo throw a barbecue party on his birthday again. Theo has given birth to their second child and the family is happy. Meanwhile, Danny has adopted a cat. After the birthday party, Danny and Theo give each other a small gift, then remind each other to return their gifts in the morning. That evening, Danny opens his gift, taking out the VR disc. Meanwhile, Theo opens her gift and puts her wedding ring inside the box. Theo heads into a bar, dressed up and without her wedding ring. A man smiles at her from across the bar. Danny and Carl log into the game and immediately start making out.